Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 31st of January of 2023. Today we're going to start with the south, with Kherson district. As you can see, there are some icons in this area. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to destroy at least 2 warehouses in this area of artillery shells, of artillery weapons and so on. And furthermore, when talking about the Ukrainians, during the previous 24 hours, they made another attempt to cross Dnipro River and to establish bridgehead on these islands. But the Russians reported that they spotted those boats and they started actively attacking this area with artillery. And as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians were defeated and they were forced to step back. And this, of course, according to the Russian sources, I believe that these islands is in the gray zone. As you can see, some part of island considered as the territory as a gray zone or as a territory under Ukrainian control. Some parts of these islands are under Russian control. So I believe that there are a lot of commandos, Ukrainian commandos and scouts, who are crossing this area every day and who's trying to train to develop their skills and so on, because as I understand, because of a big number of artillery systems from the Ukrainian side on their bank of the river, plus a big number of artillery ammo depot in this area and so on, plus many attempts of crossing this river tells me that Ukrainians are planning to do something in the future, and the things that they're doing right now is just exercising practice to gain as much as possible experience before spring comes. And during the spring, I believe that they will increase the number of attempts, and maybe we'll see some kind of penetration in this area, and possibly we'll see a small bridgehead of Ukrainians on the Russian side of the river. Maybe, who knows. When talking about Zaporizhzhia area, there are no changes. The Russians, when talking about Orekhov, Gulia-Polya, stopped any attempts of offensive operation in this area, just regular artillery duels, but the number or intensity of artillery duels are so low, so we can say that there are no even icons on the map showing that there are any artillery duels at all. When talking about Vuhledar, I believe that the Russians were, at least at this stage of offensive operation, at this stage of special military operation, the Russians were completely stopped and they're not moving anymore. They're not storming Vuhledar. There are just regular artillery duels on the front line. The Russians reported that as a result of the previous 24 hours clashes, the Ukrainians lost around 40 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles and around 2 ammo depot in this area that located on the north, on the line from Novomikhailivka to Uspenovka. On this line, the Ukrainians uses this area to support and supply Vuhledar and the vicinity of this town with ammo and shell and manpower. Further, when talking about Vremivka tactical bridgehead, the Russians reported that they attacked the 110th Brigade in this area, and when talking about Vuhledar and the vicinity of Vuhledar, the Russians reported that they were trying to attack and to get 72nd Mechanized Brigade. Another interesting updates are coming from Vuhledar, and the thing is that the Russians couldn't enter the town itself. The weather is very bad there. The Russian officers and soldiers on the ground are saying that they are not able to use drones, they are not able to use aircrafts because of bad weather. They can't see, they can't do any intelligence, any reco using the air systems, aircrafts. So that's why they're trying to save the ground position they have right now. When talking about the tactic that the Russians uses these days, first of all, they have at least 3 directions of their attack. The first one from Nikolskoye in direction of the coal mine in this area. Another one from this residential area between Pavlovka and Nikolskoye to the north in direction of this residential area. And the third direction of Russian attack is a little bit to the west from Pavlovka through this airport to the north and the main direction is to move along these forest lines, along these brushes as far as possible to the north, and to cut the road that connects Bogayavlenka with Vuhledar. These days, these two towns, like Bogayavlenka and Vodyana, these two towns are the main towns that Ukrainians are using to supply Vuhledar. So by attacking from Nikoyska in direction of this coal mine, the Russians want to cut this line of support, and by attacking from the west part of Pavlovka to the north, the Russians want to establish physical control over this road that Ukrainians use to support forces in Vuhledar. For now, I can't tell you about the progress. That was some kind of explanation of Russian operation these days, but the only thing I'm sure for 100% that there are no more movements on the ground when talking about today, just regular clashes, regular artillery duels, or even if there are some movements, there were no reports about that. Maybe we will receive some reports by the end of this day about some progress and so on. When talking about Marinka, there are still heavy clashes. The Russians still haven't established control over the entire town. The Ukrainians are moving more and more reserves to the western part of Marinka. And when talking about Marinka and the vicinity of Marinka, at least at this stage of offensive operation, the most important part is the town by the name of Pobeda, this small town that's located on the south of Marinka. And the thing is, if we take a look at this map, at the map of Institute of Study of War, there is a hill right on the south from Pobeda, this one 250 meters above the level of the sea. This is the highest point on this front line. And now we can say that the main clashes are for this hill, because if the Russians are able to establish control over this hill, they will be able to see everything that happens in the towns on the south, like Novomikhailivka, Paraskovyevka, Kostiantinovka, Katerinovka, Antonovka, on the line of these towns, and they will be able to target the Russian artillery drones and just to establish eye control over this line. So the Russians pushes in direction of Pobeda in the south, and as you can see, according to this map, the Ukrainians still have control over this area. When talking about the Russian sources map, this is Pobeda, and as you can see, this is the trenches, this is the blue line, and this is the focal point and the vital area that the Russians need to establish control over. If they are able to get there, they will be able to control everything, and the entire Ukrainian defense line will be collapsed, and they will be forced to step back, or at least they will feel themselves not very comfortable. The same situation around Vodyana. As you can see, the Russians these days, they're trying to move to the north on the west part. They want to establish control over the hills of 238 meters and 221. This is the most important parts, and from this area they will be able to establish visual control, or at least maybe artillery control, or Bogayavlenka supply road. When talking about Vuhledar itself, as you can see, there is the highest point, 248, and the Russians are located on much lower territory. Their controls just 210 meters hills and 218. If we're talking about the western part, these hills also under Ukrainian control, but the Russians are pushing in this direction. I believe that when talking about these hills, yes, they're able to take them, and it will ease their movements to the source. But for now, there are no progress on the ground. When talking about Donetsk area, and the bridgehead near Opytna, Pesky bridgehead, the Russians are trying to move in direction of Severna, in direction of Tonenka, but without progress. And when talking about this area, there are the same problems. As you can see, when talking about the Ukrainians, they controls two hills, 232 meters and 244. These two hills are under Ukrainian control. One of these hills is located in the south of Avdiivka. When talking about the Russian sources map, this hill is located on these blue lines. So this is like a very top position, and the Ukrainians are able to control and pin down the Russians. And also this hill on the north, according to the Russian sources map, this hill is like on the border, on the edge of gray zone. But as you can see, the Russians haven't established control, or this hill also not is in the gray zone, even according to the Russian sources. And we're talking about this 232 meters hill. So this hill is also under Ukrainian control, and the Ukrainians have their eye position there, and they are using this position to pin down the Russians in Vadiana, and they're not allowing them to develop their offensive operation. So as you can see, when talking about Pesky front line, the main hills are under Ukrainian control. And when talking about the Russians, they have just one hill in the south, in the area Krasnogorovka, and from this position they're controlling Krasnogorovka. But as we can see, the Russians are not using the benefits from this hill, and they're not pushing in direction of Nivolsk, and they're not supporting their forces and in Krasnogorovka as well. And when talking about the Russian side, as you can see, this hill maybe is not under Russian control, because the Russian source map shows that this hill is also under Ukrainian control. So anyway, maybe this area is in the gray zone, maybe it's not under Russian control, who knows. So we can't do any real conclusions based on the maps, because they are a lot of completely different and opposite information. When talking about Bakhmut, there are a lot of updates, a lot of interesting updates. One more thing about Donetsk front line. When talking about Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost around 50 soldiers and 3 artillery systems. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that during the previous 24 hours they couldn't destroy even a single armored vehicle, and this is very important. When talking about artillery systems, the Ukrainian lost Caesar, the French artillery system. We haven't heard since, I believe, for the last few months about this artillery system, about the losses from the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainian lost another M777 artillery system and old Soviet Amstab B howitzer. When talking about Bakhmut, as you can see, today we received first confirmation of the fact that the Russians established control over a small village. It's not even a village, it's maybe a farm. There are a few buildings in this area, some forest line over the town or farm by the name of Zaporizhzhia, this one. Let's return back to Western sources map to understand. So, as you can see, the Russians got control over this village, and the most important, the Russians established control over this cross, and now they have established physical control over the road between, let's say, the western part, southwestern part of Seversk bridgehead and Seversk itself. So this supply line has been cut, and the Ukrainians are no longer able to use this road to supply and support their forces in the vicinity of Seversk. So let's update this map just to understand the real picture on this front line. So it's not a very big bridgehead, but the value of this town is very important. Now, from this bridgehead, the Russians are able to establish, let's say, some kind of defense line along the river, and not to allow the Ukrainians to make some kind of counter-offensive operation from Fedorovka. Furthermore, now the Russians are able to storm Mykolaievka at least from 2 sides, and I believe that we can start counting days before this town is going to fall. And of course, the Russians will continue their development in direction of Vasyukovka, Bandarne, and Nikiforovka. So now the Russians can move to the west. Furthermore, if you see, when talking about Bakhmut itself, the progress on this front line are slowed down. We don't see like a lot of towns. There are very heavy clashes. There are a lot of forces, and the Russians, of course, they are very effective. They're very professional, but they're human, just soldiers. And of course, they don't want to have losses. They understand the risk. They understand that they can lose all their army in the vicinity of Bakhmut. So maybe this is the reason the Russians during the next week will try to change their focus, and they will try to develop their bridgehead at that place, at the place they are able to develop the bridgehead. So, and as we can see, they can do this in the vicinity of Soledar. They can move in direction of Vasyukovka, Bandarne. These towns are very small. You can encircle them. You can attack them by tanks. So there are not much fortifications. You can see all these tanks from drones. There are not much places where the Ukrainians are able to hide their soldiers. So I believe that maybe the Russians will try to make not small, I believe it's a very big hook, but they can try to develop their bridgehead, something like this, and to attack and to try to encircle the Ukrainians, something like this. And using this attack, using this development, they will be able to encircle Bakhmut. Furthermore, they will be able to encircle much more forces, and they can get this canal, because as we understand, Bakhmut, Soledar, Siversk, this is the current front line that have been penetrated by the Russians, and now the Ukrainians are trying to prepare another defense line, and the next it's a temporary defense line. I believe that the Russians are able to penetrate this defense line easily, but anyway they will have to spend some time, and the next defense line the Ukrainians are planning to build along this canal. So this is the upcoming, the next barrier in front of the Russians before they get the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk. The Russians will penetrate this defense line easily, but anyway it will take another weeks or even months before they're able to do this. Furthermore, we understand that the main thing that Ukrainians want to achieve is to get some time, to earn some time, to receive Western weapon, and after that maybe they will feel themselves much more comfortable than they can feel themselves these days. So this is the plans and this is the movements. Furthermore, if the Russians change their focus and now they will try to develop their offensive operation in this area, they can achieve at least two goals. They are able to ruin the Ukrainian plans in the vicinity of Seversk and on Liman bridgehead. Furthermore, they will be able to create a deeper encirclement of Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut as well. So by attacking in this area, by penetrating in direction of Slaviansk, they can ruin the Ukrainian plans, because the storm process of Bakhmut can wait. Furthermore, when talking about Vuhledar one more time, some Russian soldiers, officers on the ground, military experts are saying that now they are saying that the storm operation of Vuhledar was some kind of a fake attack. It was some kind of it wasn't real operation as the same. It wasn't real as the operation. Storm operation or offensive operation in Orekhov-Gulay-Polye, and the main goal that the Russians were trying to achieve or are trying to achieve by attack in direction of Vuhledar is to freeze or pin down the Ukrainian reserves. Furthermore, by that attack they were planning to force the Ukrainians to redeploy some forces from Bakhmut front line to the south in direction of Vuhledar. For now, I can't tell you whether they were able to achieve those goals or not, but anyway, we see that there is a progress in the vicinity of Soledar, very slow, but it's a progress, and the Russians, by attacking in these directions, showed us the next plans of encirclement of Ukrainians on Kupyansk-Liman front line. So this is the possible direction of attack, and Ukrainian intelligence almost every single day they repeat the same thing, that the Russians will be focused during the next months over Liman and Donetsk area, and this is the possible direction of their attack. When talking about Liman and Kupyansk front line, about these areas, there are still clashes in this area. The Russians attacked the 25th Brigade, 95th, 114th, 103rd Brigades in the towns, in the area and the vicinity of this forest, in Yampolovka, in this town on the north. We're talking about Tabaevka, we're talking about these towns near Kupyansk and so on. As a result of clashes or artillery duels in this area, the Ukrainians lost around 105 soldiers, something around 10 armored vehicles, and another artillery system. But as you can see, the front lines are stable, no movements on the ground, just a small push, and I believe that the Russians are saying that the Russians is the side who pushes every single day, very slowly, meter by meter, checkpoint by checkpoint, but the Russians are pushing, and for now the main direction the Russians are pushing in is Makeevka, so the line between Novovodiane and Nevskaya. So this line is the bank of Zherebets river, so the Russians want to return control, and but I believe that they need to hurry up a little bit. When talking about changes on the ground among the forces, among deployment, there are two interesting updates. when talking about, let's say, Avdiivka and Peski front line, the Ukrainians deployed their 17th Separate Infantry Battalion. It's a fresh forces, and I understand that their main goal is to hold the hills in this area and not to allow the Russians to develop their offensive operation in the direction of Severna and Toninka. When talking about Kupyansk front line, the Russians deployed their 71st Jaeger Brigade in the vicinity of Yampolovka, Terny, Toretsk, Tarskoye. This brigade used to be, I believe that there are some parts of this brigade. If you remember, this brigade used to be near Soledar, but I believe that brigade was very damaged and the Ukrainians were forced to move this brigade to the back. So I believe that maybe some parts of that brigade were deployed in the vicinity, in the forest around Kremena, just to reinforce the Ukrainian forces in this area. But I'm not sure that Ukrainians are planning to start any offensive operation. Maybe they just want to hold this area as long as possible. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.